And that tension has gnawed at the very core value system of Australians who want to be good world citizens. And the question is how to fix it. And my view is the time has come, the day is ready, when we've got to say we're pro-refugee and we'll take, say, a certain number of refugees every year, say 20,000, which is more than what we're taking now. We will work towards getting the first world to solve some of the refugee problems. That we will withdraw from being a member state of the Convention. Not many people have been talking about that, but I think the time is right. The upshot of those actions is that the boats will stop instantly. The tragedies such as Civex will stop, won't happen again. The incredible waste of money on border control will be reduced. The stain on our Australian reputation as a good and fair-minded people will start to fade more quickly. So from my perspective, what's happened with refugees is what's concerned people and why people are thinking that a Bill of Rights may be needed. I take the view that a Bill of Rights wouldn't have stopped the Howard government in doing what they did. I take the view that we can and should do something about the refugee issues. I take the view that we've got a parliament and every 3 years we can change those people, and that the pendulum spends more time in the middle. So Australians are fair-minded. Sometimes we overreact, but we usually come back to the centre. And I'm concerned that if we end up with a Bill of Rights, we'll end up with another layer of bureaucracy. Being a lawyer for many years, I have great difficulty with bureaucracy. I hate it. And I don't want to see another layer in our system which is going to make life more complicated. So they're my genuine concerns. But of course I respect and admire Julian for his position on this matter. Thank you.
Whilst you're settling in, Jeremy, I'll just hop in and get the first word.
Congratulations, Julian. That's not the first time.
You said we were good people, and that's probably right, but I'm not sure it's even the issue. You said that you are proud to be Australian. Generally speaking, I am too, but for years I was ashamed to be Australian. I thought what was going on in this country was scandalous. And the irony was that in all of the cases that we tried to do, most of them unsuccessfully, when right at the centre of every problem we took to court was a human rights violation, the one thing you couldn't argue about in court was human rights, because the law doesn't recognise human rights in Australia. So human rights weren't relevant. You'd have to go to obscure corners of administrative law and odd little things like that, but you couldn't argue about human rites, and I think that's grotesque. Now, can I mention one other thing that ties in with all of this, and that is the culture.
You're not going to let me get a word in, are you?
Yeah, I am. I just want to finish. I was because I'd forgotten doing the B&B case.
I forgot to tell you I come from a very big family and I've always had my say.
Okay. I'd forgotten that I did the B&B case, and it was interesting because I had to come over to Adelaide for a directions hearing in the underlying litigation on the same day that the full court appeal was being decided in Melbourne. And so I'm in the family court here, and because of the time difference, the decision came down in Melbourne. We'd won, that was terrific, and that obviously had an effect on the directions that had to be made in the court here. Counsel for the Commonwealth got up in the family court in Adelaide here and announced to His Honour that the full court appeal had been allowed and that the children had been ordered to be released from Baxter. And he then said, and I still cannot work out what possessed him to say it, but he said with a sense of virtue that the department Notwithstanding that they had been ordered to release the children from detention immediately, the department were willing to allow them to remain in Baxter in the shade for the 4 hours it would take for a vehicle to get to Baxter to pick them up. In other words, we're going to be good people and not throw them out onto the roadside in the sun to wait for a vehicle. And I thought, now what sort of cultural setting is it that enables anyone to say that, to volunteer it as if they're doing a good thing? And in the same frame, just before Baxter was opened, I was provided with a copy of the ground plan of the facility, and the ground plan shows it's surrounded by a perimeter fence, which is described on the plan as a courtesy fence. And I happened to be at a public meeting a few months ahead of the opening of Baxter, and on the same platform with me was Philippa Godwin, who was the Deputy Secretary of the Department in charge of the Lock 'em Up Division, and I publicly asked her why it was that an electric fence was described as a courtesy fence, because I didn't think an electric fence was a particularly courteous thing. And she looked me in the eye and in front of the entire audience said, "It's not an electric fence, it's an energised fence." And again I wondered, what is the cultural setting that enables a person to say something like that, knowing that you're talking about electric fences for human beings? Now, it's the culture that needs to change. We may be good people, but if we're misinformed about what's going on, if we don't understand the reality of what's being done to minorities, especially unpopular minorities, then human rights abuses will happen.
Agreed, Julian. Do you think we could devote more energy into teaching children in the school system about these things?
Undoubtedly. Undoubtedly.
And that might work.
But what then? What then? Everyone says, yeah, okay, human rights are terrific, and I now understand that those other people are human as well. And what's the next step?
Well, education is king as far as people learning good values.
Okay.
And that's
and
what happens.
In a generation from now, we'll have lots of people growing up to be lawyers and doctors and social workers and so on who think, yes, okay, asylum seekers are also human. It's a pity we can't do anything about their rights because the law doesn't recognise human rights.
Well, I've had some chance to think about some of these issues, Julian, and one of the issues, and everyone here might be aware of the fact that we've signed up or been signatory to so many different conventions, but the reality is unless they're adopted into Australian domestic law, they have no significance.
That's the point.
And the reality is, for the last 50 years or so, government after government haven't adopted these things because Australians don't like to do what everyone else does in the world. They want to control their own destiny. And I had to think about that, thinking that you'd be asking me some of these questions. And I thought about what happened in the First World War, how we sent a generation of our best people and they were killed, they were lost in a war that was badly run by our side. And I think that those sort of incidents change Australia's attitude in the world, and we like to do it our own way. And what I've talked about today is about the refugee problem. Because we're not serious about it, we've actually turned around and we've talked about excising from the migration zone the big island, the one we call Australia. It's all of those things, Julian, and that's because of the fundamental problem that it doesn't fit well with our nature, our core values, that a million people can come tomorrow and claim refugee status.
I think it's a bit alarmist to say that we shouldn't have a Bill of Rights in case a million people come here seeking asylum. Our entire history has shown that regardless of what government is in place and regardless of what laws are in place, we've never had anything even vaguely approaching a million people trying to come here and take over. If anyone's entitled to have that sort of scaremongering concern, it's the Indigenous population, because they were invaded and they were pretty comprehensively taken over. But you know, when you look at the numbers since the end of the Fraser government, the average arrival rate of boat people, that's unauthorised asylum seekers coming here, the average arrival rate was about 1,000 a year, which is trivial. You know, have 200,000 new voluntary migrants coming here every year. So 1,000 leakage in the form of boat people isn't really very serious.